Hey gang, today we are in St. Charles, Arkansas. We're in the central east, I would say east central part of the state, and we are on the river delta, near the river delta, the White River. Very famous river here, and we are at the St. Charles Cemetery. We're here to visit someone's grave who is pretty famous around these parts. Very actually inspirational story here of a woman that lived a very interesting life, in many ways very tragic. Her name was Helen Spence. Now, there was a book that I read, and you know I don't recommend very many books here, but when I find a good one, which led me to this story, I'm going to recommend it to you. It was written by an author named Denise Parkinson, daughter of the White River. And it's a really good book. And some of the facts and some of the things we're going to talk about, I've got out of the book. And she did a lot of research. I think she's also got a movie, a documentary that's coming out or may have come out. So after you hear the story, I'll put some links in. I don't know Denise, but I'm going to give her the shout out because she did good work. And it led me to this beautiful place here. So let's take a walk. Give you a little background on the river delta, the people here. We're going to go back to the 1920s, 1930s, what life was like here, and in many ways, not a lot has changed. So let's take a walk and take a look at some stones here in this beautiful cemetery. Old cemetery, as you could imagine. So as we go back to those days in this area of Arkansas on the White River, it was, well, the White River itself runs some 700 miles from north central Arkansas, meandering south towards Mississippi. And in this area, the delta, and down below it joins up with the Arkansas and Mississippi rivers. Now, there were many different ethnicities living here. It was a houseboat community. They lived literally on the water. And it's not like the houseboats we think of today. Although they did have pontoons, I guess, but they were like big logs. But these were like houses, like bedroom houses with porches. And they lived on the river, floated on the river. I'm sure they were tied to the banks most of the time. Now, there were two distinctions of people here. There were and it's a little derogatory in a way, but they called them the river rats. Now, it's kind of like anything. If you're within the group of people, you can call each other the river rats, but otherwise it's derogatory if you're an outsider. But everyone here on land were the drylanders. And they had different ways, of course, and different ways of settling justice. So, yeah, they lived on the houseboats. They were pretty self-sufficient. Hunted, trapped, fished, of course. And the big trade, if you will, in this whole area were these mussels. And they would get the mussels out of the river, and the river mussel shells would actually be used for plastics, the shells. It would make actually most of the buttons in our country be sent to the button factories. In fact, they supplied the entire United States Army all the buttons on their uniforms. Now, the way to get these mussels, you have to get to the bottom, and I found this most interesting is, and I'm going to call them bucket heads, name I just kind of thought of, but they would make these, and they probably were buckets, and many of them had no glass or anything, and they would pump air into them, and these guys would weigh themselves down, and maybe women too, with rocks, and just sink down to the bottom, who knows how many feet, could be 20, 30 feet, and just imagine just reaching and feeling around for the mussels. And when it was time to come up, and they had their fill in their sack, they would drop all the rocks and just rise to the surface. So they worked hard and everything was going good. Now, let's go back to that year of 1930. And we're going to talk about Helen. Helen was 18 years old. And of course she was on the river. That's where she was born, literally on the boat, the houseboat. And is up north of here, the town of Clarendon. Clarendon, known as the gateway to the Delta. Now, her father's name was Wilburn Spence. He went by the name of Haserot, 37 years old. Her mother's name was Ellen, but Ellen died when she was a toddler, and Haserot remarried. He remarried to a woman named Ada. Helen had a younger sister, Eva, who went by Evie, and sadly she was stricken with polio. She couldn't walk. Now, the houseboat on those huge logs sustained the family, but Haserot worked off that boat with a smaller boat as a fishing guide. He would also work as a hunting guide, and he'd do other jobs too. And at a certain point, they would move. And how do you move? When you have a houseboat, you just simply float downstream. And they did so for some 30 miles until they got here to St. Charles, and this is where they settled down. Now, on the fateful day, the real start of the story, Helen and her mom were with Evie, Ada, and watching over Evie, and Haserot had gone out with this guy, and he was taking this guy hunting, fishing. And they were in the boat downriver, and Mom said, oh, he forgot his lunch, or we've got to get him his lunch. So they packed it up and they said to Evie, well, we'll be back in just a little bit. I mean, we're going to be right around the bend here. So they left Evie alone and got in the rowboat. Now, this guy that Haserot was with was named Jack Worrells. And later people would recollect, or some say that he came from Mississippi and worked for the lumber industry. He's doing something. Nobody really knew him. And there were a lot of transient people coming at that time. Why? Because of the Great Depression that happened before. And people were looking for a new way of life. Things were on the comeback a little bit. Now, Jack was really out not for the pleasure of hunting or fishing. Jack was here to rob. For some reason, he got the idea that the family had a lot of money. So they're on the boat, and Ada and Helen are rounding the bend, and they look and they see the two guys standing in the boat, which is unusual, you know, a little boat. And all of a sudden they see this guy, Jack, shoot their father, Helen's father, and he drops down to his knees, and then he pushes them overboard. And, oh my God, can you imagine? So they're like drifting towards the boat, and Jack looks at them, and he's got the gun leveled on him, and he's like, get over here. So they row over, and right away Ada's thinking, now stepmother, she loves her children, loves her family, but she's like thinking fast. She's like, oh, this is bad, because the guy's like, where's the money, where's the money? Yelling at them. And first thing she says, you know, I know where the money is. She's trying to diffuse the situation as she says that. She's putting on the picture that Helen is like mentally disabled. And the idea was that she knew they were in trouble and that they were witnesses. So the idea is, if Helen's mentally disabled, she won't remember anything. She can't ID him. And it worked, because he took her, Ada, on his boat, and he kicked the boat away with Helen to let it drift off. And that's the last time Helen saw her mom, her stepmom, and for that matter, her father. So, what happened? Well, people found Helen a long time later, just floating by herself on the river. Of course, she told everybody what happened. I mean, she wasn't like 6 years old, and she could tell details. So now everybody was looking for Jack. A lot of people, there were some people that knew him, and the word went out, and all the river people banded together, and they closed in on him. And they caught him. It didn't take long. And they caught him. Of course, I didn't do it. Sadly, Ada, I mean, the good side was Ada was still alive. He didn't kill her. He assaulted her. He did all the bad things that, you can imagine. Beat the heck out of her. He beat her so bad that she did get to the Memphis hospital finally, but that's where she succumbed. She died. So now Helen's an orphan, and well, she's got her sister. What are we going to do? Well, what's the next thing that happens? Of course, trial. You get this guy in jail. Trial starts, and we've got we're in the drylander justice system, and that's where this story is going to take a turn, because river people, justice is an eye for an eye. But we know, like today, how drylander justice works. People don't get the eye for the eye punishment, and in many cases, today they get off. So Helen had to sit through this trial. She sat there right in the front, this petite, 5'1" tall little woman who was dressed in a meticulously designed red silk and wool suit with a white rabbit fur muff. And it's all what she had made for herself. The trial was well underway, and Helen was cringing as she listened to the defense attorney, watching the prosecution's case just unravel. How could it be so? Well, defense attorneys are pretty slick, even back in those days. They need to be if they're going to get these guilty people off. And then out of nowhere, she stood up and she walked over to Jack Worrell's, and she pulled out a pearl-handled revolver hidden in her muff. And guess what she did with that revolver? Yeah, she shot him 4 times in the chest, and she shot such a tight pattern. They say you could have thrown a hat over it. Well, of course, everybody dove for under the tables, ran out of the building, pandemonium, and she just sat there calm, gave her gun to the sheriff. No big deal. I got my justice. What's the funny part of the story is the sheriff was trying to unload the gun, and she kind of just calmly reached over to him, took it away, and everyone's like diving for the tables again. And she says it sticks sometimes, and unloaded all the bullets, gave it back to him. 18 years old. Isn't that something? She was quite a woman, quite a remarkable woman. Well, River Justice. And of course, she was immediately arrested, although she did have the public sympathy behind her. She was put under house arrest, so to speak, living with the sheriff and his wife. She was allowed to work while they were setting up a trial for her out on bail, I guess you could call it. And she was doing so well that she was able to work some jobs. Now, the cafe she worked at, there was the manager, and he was a self-proclaimed Greek. His name was Jim Bohats. Really bad guy, a sexist, and just kind of a beast. And he would just not leave her alone. Now, there was John Black. I can't remember if John Black was... He was a guy, a friend who was checking on her. I don't know if he was associated with the sheriff or what, but he was always looking out for her. And he would come in, and when he would come in, Jim Bohats would like have a fit, a conniption. Because I think he liked Helen. He's trying to get his paws on her the whole time. So finally, you know, and she would have none of it. I mean, Helen was strong. She knew what was going on. This guy was disgusting. So finally, Jim says, and Jim had the fancy car, you know, the biggest car in town. He had like all the flashy stuff, a braggart. Let's go for a drive. You misunderstand me. I'm actually a nice guy. So he took her for the drive. And the next thing you know, this guy's found shot dead. And paralleling that, Helen was seen in her white dress coming out of the woods all muddy in that area. So, of course, she's number one suspect. Number one suspect. But they really didn't have the evidence to convict her or really take it any farther. So it turned into a cold case. Now, Helen would be convicted, of course, of Jack's murder. It was manslaughter. It was October 8th, 1932. Now, she was paroled. Short time after that, there was such public sympathy for her. Everyone understood. So she was freed on June 10th, 1933. And I think it was Little Rock where she went, and for some unknown reason, literally, I think it was a week later, she goes into the police department, and she says, she confesses. She's like, I did it. Now, some say, a lot of people, there's all kinds of conspiracy theories, and maybe true, the biggest one was that there were some crooked lawyers or politicians or police that, you know, kind of tricked her into doing it. You know, maybe you get a pardon and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, that was a wrong move, because they sent her to this horrible place called the P Farm. And the P Farm was the woman's prison. It wasn't really like a prison like you think. It was a farm. It was a work farm. And it was a torturous, evil place. It was a horrible place. There was a woman warden, and she worked with her husband and his cronies. And you know what they would do there? They would, you know, the women would work all day in the fields doing, you know, hard labor. But it was, you know, I hate to compare it to World War II in a way, to, you know what went on. You know, I'm just afraid to say some of the stuff on YouTube. Videos get, I don't want my stuff censored, but you know what I'm talking about. The evil stuff. And, you know, the slave labor and worse. So what I'm talking about is they would take these women. It is said they would have buses, and they'd take work all day and then get in the bus and go into town, and you would be spread out in sold as prostitutes. And like library books, they were taken out by individual plantation owners for days or weeks to serve them for big money. I mean, really big money. Can you imagine? Yeah. So this operation was just cruising along. It was a state institution with no supervision by the state. And it was a torture house. Now, Helen would make a number of daring escapes when she was there, but she'd always end up getting caught. They'd throw her back in. Now, before I continue the story, I'm just walking over here looking, and it looks like a crypt, something interesting over here. So anyway, as I walked to this crypt, they sent her to, they kind of got sick and tired of her, so they sent her to the asylum. And this was a brutal place too, you know, the shock treatments, all the stuff we always talk about. Yeah, they were, I think she got 20 or 30 shock treatments there. So she was, they were just like killing her slowly. Just imagine how petite, small she was, strong woman, but how much can a body take? Now this is a World War II veteran, private in the U.S. Army. Look at this. Oh, I can't even reach in there. These are all sticker bushes. And Charles Knoll passed in 1966, born in 25. So he was in his late teens, probably. The war ended in 45. He was 20. Yeah, that's October he was born, so late 25. He was barely 20 when the war ended. So they sent her to this asylum. Shock treatments, bad deal. It was called the State Hospital for Nervous Diseases. And what did she do there? She was very smart. She was actually a good writer. So you know what she did? All of this stuff that happened until then, she decided she was going to write a memoir. She was going to tell all book. And she did. She wrote up a nice piece, and she sent it by mail to the newspaper or magazine. And she made the mistake of putting the return address as the P farm because they didn't like the story, I guess, and they went, pfft. And they sent it back to the P farm. Didn't go to her. Where do you think it ended up? Ended up on the warden's desk. Oh, she was a marked woman now. Marked woman. And this would start what we call the tailspin. This thing's now really escalated. They built a wooden cage for her. I think it was like those pictures you see. You know, those pictures we see, those horrible bed cages. But anyway, and they would stick that cage in the sun. It was 100 degrees and humid. I mean, summers down here, hot. They would then beat her with a whip in a set of lashes, 10 lashes usually. I mean, that would just put you in the hospital for days or weeks. But one day, she was, all of a sudden it was just everything, the cage was left open. Nobody was around. She got out. She's looking around. And it's like, what's going on? It was weird. She walked outside. No one was around. She's like, I'm out of here. So what do you think she does? She escapes again, but where's she gonna go? She's just walking the road. Well, it was a setup. said years later there was a guy working on the water pump outside who testified that he watched her walk out, and he watched the warden and all the other guys chuckling. Look, 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 there she goes. It was all set up because she was knocking on doors for help, and I think those people turned her in, contacted the prison, and the next thing you know, the prison truck is on the road hunting. Who's in the truck? Well, Assistant Prison Superintendent V.O. Brockman, the husband of the warden, and prison trustee Frank Martin, himself a convicted murderer. And they came upon Helen in the truck, and there would be no return to the cage because it was Frank Martin who shot Helen in the head, right behind her ear. Of course, you know, when this all unfolded, they said, "She got a gun, she attacked us. Self-defense." Yeah, bullet to the back of the head, self-defense. So, and in true form for Drylander justice, what do you think happened? There was a trial. They were acquitted. Yeah, real justice. So it's a sad ending to the story. But this story has gone around this area, and Helen is an absolute inspiration. I think this cemetery here, people come all over the country, if not all over the world, every week to pay respects to Helen, whose grave is right over here. Let's take a look. And she obviously is not forgotten. This is a new stone. You can tell by just looking at it. Helen Ruth Spence, February 23rd, 1912, and that fateful day, July 11th, a hot summer, 1934. And it says, "Beloved child of the river." Oh, very sad story here as I stand before her grave. I believe her father is buried here also. Haserot. I see another grave over here without a stone. Could this be him? Yeah. Now I can't believe it. Haserot has no stone. So Haserot, let's get a zoom in on this. Haserot, Wilburn Haserot Spence, born November 21st, 1892, died 1930. Well, they're both here. Now, what's interesting is that John Black went, of course, you know, her friend. When she died, they took her body to Little Rock, and it was a macabre, disgusting display of Helen Spence. They put her in the window, the funeral parlor. The throng came to gawk. So in the night, I think John Black and some other river friends stole her body. They stole Haserot's body too. I guess he was there. And they brought them here. John did, and he didn't tell anybody. He actually, I think he left them and he buried them here. Way down here, you can just imagine the cemetery up there. He came down here in the woods and buried them. And he, of course, they were not marked, but it was said there was a cedar tree that he planted. Is this a cedar tree? I don't know. I'm guessing this is an oddball tree. Not a tree expert, but I'm guessing this is the tree that he planted. If not, he did plant a tree here to watch over these graves, well, to mark these graves. These two graves. And then he got a job here. He kind of pushed out the cemetery caretaker and he said, I'm going to do the work here. And he did that because he wanted to just kind of keep an eye on the secret graves, which he did for many years. He finally confided in a loyal friend, L.C. Brown. L.C. Brown, he said, don't tell anybody until I die. And John died in 1979. Now, L.C. kept it secret for 10 more years. 10 more years. Well, Sister Evie passed away in 1998. She's buried in Yuba, California, Yuba County. I believe she did get married. And John and Elsie were trying to get Helen a pardon the whole time since she was murdered. Elsie died in 2015. And as I understand it, the author that I referenced, Denise White Parkinson, is working on right now to get Helen the pardon. So let's all, you know, this is another one where we can all maybe I'll put a link in if I can get a link, Governor, right? I mean, if this story touches you like it does me, I think that's very admirable. Look over here. I just saw, this must be the tree because I see some marker here. Look at this. Yeah, beloved. No, it just says, beloved daughter of the White River, Helen Spence, gone but not. This has to be the tree, guys, right? I mean, why would they put that on the tree? This has to be the cedar tree. Wow, it's really neat. It really is neat to come here and see this tree and know it was just a little sapling here when this all happened. So, what do you all think? What do you guys think? Do you think Helen was righteous? I think so. I think so. Well, they're both buried here, St. Charles Cemetery. Rest in peace, Helen Ruth Spence and Cicero Spence. Rest in peace.
Life changed for Molly when they lost the farm that year. Her mother counted pennies while her father hid his fears. Times were hard, they couldn't buy much. Molly wore run-down shoes. She could walk clear to heaven in sad shoes. Mama said the Lord loves the soul of you and not the souls upon your feet. You could dress like the poorest beggar and have riches they can't see. Sad shoes, sad shoes. When Molly hears that name, she walks tall just the same. For in her heart she knows that no matter how worn her soul, she can walk clear to heaven in sad shoes. Sad shoes.